So what have we got here then, Russell? This is
Well, what we've got here is undoubtedly one of the jewels of the collection. These are samples taken by I.K. Brunel himself when he was plotting out the route of the Great Western Railway between London and Bristol. These are all the different samples of rock from the route. Each one has a handwritten label on it. Those are the labels written by Mr. Brunel himself, and it's something that, as one of the curators at the museum, amuses me because we quite often get letters from visitors telling us that they're spelt wrong. And we have to write back and say, well, that may be the case, but I'm afraid that is what Mr. Brunel wrote, and it's not really up to us to change it. You know, we're here to preserve things, not correct them as we would see it.
Where did he keep them?
Where did he keep them? He kept them in his office. These were working things. Yeah, I mean, they're now in this beautiful display case, but that would have been done after the project. It's the equivalent of one of those boardroom models that go in. But at the time, these were practical samples, so they knew what they were dealing with at different parts of the line, you know, the surveyors and whatnot. And it's a marvellous thing also. It shows you how important the building of the rail network was for the understanding of the geology of Britain. Because before this was done, apart from mines, what work went on that exposed so much of the hidden landscape to people's gazes? Apart from, I suppose, canals, but relatively small by comparison. The works of the great rail system exposed areas of land that would never have been touched. And it must have pushed the science of geology forward in leaps and bounds in ways that would never have happened otherwise, because they would never have had a chance to see this rock strata and get to grips with how it could be understood.
So if Brunel was pushing forward with all his ideas and the knowledge of the geology was actually not that advanced anyway,
no, it wasn't.
How much of it was wing and a prayer then?
Well, a lot of it would have been wing and a prayer. I mean, that's why our rail system was so over-engineered, because they had to build with a view that nothing was really going to go wrong. It was going to last for 100 years. I think there was it when Stevenson was asked about one of his tunnels on the Manchester and Leeds Railway, and his response was basically, it'll outlast the Earth. You know, somebody said, well, how long will this last? What he's saying was they're going to engineer it to such a degree that whatever possible threat it has, it will take. And in most cases that worked. I mean, there were some spectacular cases where the technology failed because at the same time as over-engineering, they were often working with materials that they didn't fully understand themselves. I mean, it still happens today, you know. I mean, the famous case being outside Chester with one of the bridges that Robert Stevenson had put down on the Chester-Holyhead Railway, and it failed in a spectacular fashion with a train on it. The train dropped into the River Dee, and everyone on board drowned. Pretty horrible. But that was the prize of these people, Brunel, Stevenson, Gooch, whatever, working at the very edge of known technology. They were pushing the boundaries all the time. The other side of that is that's why they so heavily over-engineered it, because they hoped that even if there were things they didn't know, it was so heavily engineered it could survive. Because obviously it would be bad for business if we kept failing.
and of course there were also the spectacular successes, weren't there? Things like the Maidenhead Bridge, which everybody said would collapse because the arch was too wide.
Absolutely right.
And Brunel had complete confidence in it, didn't he?
He did indeed, and it's the sort of thing that made Brunel famous. I mean, he totally understood the publicity value of something like that, because he's poking his finger in the eye of the establishment. You know. Brilliant. Shows what a brilliant engineer he was. You know, I suppose with that brilliance came the kind of certain level of arrogance that meant that even when, like we were talking before about his broad gauge track, there were very clear arguments economically why this wasn't a good idea. He just brushed that aside because he was such a genius that basically he wasn't going to listen to any pygmies who got in his way. You know?
And of course there are times when there seem to be times in history where that is what you need, isn't it? You need that
people who are willing to think outside the
push
box.
Forward.
Yes, that's true, because otherwise you don't push, and you don't make the bold leap. That's really what it's about. And having the confidence to make the bold leap. Because the truth is, with many of these schemes, No one really knew how successful it was going to be. It's easy for us to sit here now, 100 odd, 150 odd years on, 200 years on, whatever it is, and so, well, obviously, well, we don't know that. We only know that because it's happened. At the time, they didn't know that. They were speculating. And it could have been a spectacular disaster. Many people at the time, including senior figures in the world of railways, argued by the 1840s that the network had already become too big. And you could argue that they were proved right. If you look at the finances of many of these companies, they were very dodgy. You know, so a lot of them didn't make as much money as they expected. On the engineering side, of course, it was brilliant because it pushed the technology of engineering, of civil engineering, you know, and everything that went with it forward in so many areas that it effectively built the world we take for granted. But for the financiers involved at the time, there was a lot of cost and a lot of ruin.